In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to replace the Human Touch Super Novo remote socket and cable. First thing we're going to do is power off the chair, then unplug it. Next, we'll lift up the foot and calf massager and use a 6mm Allen wrench to remove the bolt that secures the front of the side panel. Next, we'll open the little zippered pocket at the top of the side panel and use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the screw that's inside. Next, we'll lift up on the side panel and slide it slightly forward to detach it, and just enough to expose the hoses and the connectors. So if you have an early version of Super Novo, there's a speaker cable that you need to disconnect up toward the top of the side panel. But other than that, the speaker connector is down on the side in the area where the hoses are located. Okay, next we'll use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the 4 screws that secure the rear shroud. And then we can slide that shroud backward and then rotate it clockwise just to set it behind the chair out of the way. It's still attached by that cable there. And we can continue to remove the 2 screws that secure the PCB cover. And then lift up on the front of the cover, we have a connector that needs to be disconnected before we can remove that cover. Okay, then we can pop that PCB cover off. It's attached in the back with 2 tabs installed through 2 slots, so it kind of pops off. And then we need to use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the 4 screws that secure the main PCB. We're not going to remove the PCB, but we need to be able to lift it up to gain access to the remote cable socket. Okay, next we can move the PCB slightly aside so that we can unplug that remote cable from that socket in front there. And using a wire cutters now, we need to start cutting all the zip ties that secure that remote cable, starting with right at the rear left of the PCB. And then we can fish that cable through there. There's another cable tie in that rear left corner. And again, continue to pull that cable free as we work our way back toward the remote. We find another cable tie back behind the air pump there. And then there's also a cable guide securing a couple of the cables back there that we will need a Phillips head screwdriver to remove. Okay, continuing to pull that cable through. We'll find another zip tie up around the vertical chair frame there. And then finally, one more up toward the front of the chair near the hoses. Okay, at this point we can fish that cable all the way through to the side of the chair. And if you look down between the chair seat and the frame, you'll see there's two additional zip ties installed on the inside of the frame in special zip tie holders there. So we need to cut those two. Okay, then we can unscrew the remote control from the remote socket and then use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the two screws that secure the socket to the chair frame. Then we can remove it from the chair. To install the new remote socket and cable then, we can place it into position on the chair frame and replace the two screws to secure it. And if you have very small zip ties, you can try to resecure the cable on the inside of that horizontal frame using those special zip tie holders. But if you don't, it's okay to simply wrap the zip tie around the cable and the frame, pull it tight, and then turn it so that the plastic piece doesn't, the locking piece doesn't protrude out. So just kind of turn it so it's underneath the frame. Then we can cut that excess zip tie and do the same thing a few inches down the frame toward the backrest. Next, we'll fish that cable behind that horizontal chair frame and back through to the back of the chair, and then secure it to the vertical chair frame using another zip tie. Again, cutting the excess zip tie as we go. Okay, the next zip tie we need to install is around that vertical frame by the ground wire there. Next, we need to reinstall that cable guide. If you can align the cable guide screw holes with the screw hole on the chair frame and replace the Phillips head screw to secure it. Okay, we can continue threading that cable leftward then underneath the air hoses and behind the air valve bank there and behind the air pumps. And again, as we're doing this, we want to keep removing all the slack from the cable because we'll need all that slack at the end. So once we have it running straight through behind there, not caught up on anything, then we can replace the zip tie in the left corner there to tie it to the other cables. Okay, then we have one more zip tie right at the rear corner of the main PCB. To secure that cable in place there. And then we can fish the end of that cable then underneath the PCB and up toward the remote socket. So we can lift up on the PCB from the edge closest to you to pull that cable through there. Now before we attempt to plug it into the socket, we need to align the pins with the singular pin facing up. Like so. Plug that firmly into the socket. And then we're ready to secure that main PCB by replacing the 4 Phillips head screws. Okay, then we're ready to reinstall the PCB cover. We need to line up those slots on the back with the tabs on the chair. You can use your fingers to make sure that those slots are installed over the tabs. It's very important. And then we need to reconnect that connector before we lower the front of that cover into position. Note the cables on the sides need to be coming out of the slots in the tray so they don't get pinched. Okay, then we can replace the 2 screws to secure the PCB cover. Then we can slide that rear shroud into position between the chair frame and the plastic lower side panels there. And we want to feel across the back of it to make sure that coiled cable isn't in between the shroud and the frame. It needs to be clear of there so that the shroud can bounce up and down, which is how the safety sensor works. Now we're ready to replace the 4 screws to secure the shroud. And we can make sure it can bounce up and down. To install the side panel, we're going to align the slot at the top of the backrest with the bracket at the top of the side panel, the horseshoe bracket on the lower part of the side panel with the post on the chair, and then the horizontal metal bracket on the side panel will rest on the metal bracket. But first we need to reconnect the hoses, matching the numbered hose to the same numbered fitting on the side panel. And if you have an electrical connector down in the same area, reconnect that as well at this time. Then aligning those 3 mounting points that we mentioned, we can put the panel into position. If you had a speaker connector up toward the top of the side panel, this is the time you'd connect that. And then we can slide that panel backward to engage the brackets with their mounting posts, like so. Okay, now we're ready to replace the Phillips head screw inside that zippered pocket. And we'll close that pocket. And we can lift up the foot and calf massager and reinstall that 6mm Allen bolt and washer to secure the front of the side panel. Next, we'll reinstall the remote control, making sure to line up the pins with the corresponding holes in the socket. And actually, it would have been a good idea to do this before we put the side panel on. It would have been easier. It's also important that we do not have power to the chair when doing this. It will actually kill the remote. Then we can plug in the chair and power it on. And we're done.